This is part 2 of my interview with Dan and Brady Mullen, the authors of Real Decisions, The Financial Impact of Renting and Owning. Probably one of the best books I have ever found on the impact of homeownership versus renting, especially in today's highly unaffordable renting environment. This is part 2. Let's get to it.
How to Buy a Home educates, protects, and connects first-time homebuyers to qualified vetted realtors in their area. Whether you're looking for DIY information or step-by-step guidance, How to Buy a Home is the #1 resource for first-time homebuyers.
I got Brady and Dan Mullen here again from the book, Real Decisions, The Financial Impact of Renting and Owning, and we're going to dive right back in. No need to do introductions. If you're starting here at part 2, you're weird. Go back and read and listen to part 1. Okay, I'm going to read this thing that you guys wrote because a lot of people say, Dan and I were just talking off air on the microphone about how realtors say all these things that get kind of cringy, like renting is, what was the renting one, Dan? 100%?
Yeah, you're renting. If you're worried about interest rates, renting, when you're renting, you're paying 100% interest or something like that.
Yeah, that's a big sales one, and they try to tell you don't worry about interest rates. You marry the home and you date the rate. Little sketchy on that one. Not necessarily something that you can really count on or rely on. Which now this year in 2025, I think people are getting more used to the fact that 6 and 7% is normal, y'all. And the 3s and 4s are gone. But a lot of times when people are talking about renting, they'll be like, "God, why would you rent? You're just throwing your money away." Well, then the Gen Z or the millennial is like, dude, housing's crazy unaffordable right now. Interest rates are at 7%, prices are high, and it's really hard to save a down payment. Well, I think with the podcast here, what I'm trying to do is show you how there are paths to get there. What's great about this book, and the reason why I want to talk to the Mullen brothers, is because they also understand from a financial standpoint, they're bringing in the compassion and the understanding. Listen to this package. First and most obviously, what do you have after spending millions of dollars on rent? Most people would say nothing, but I don't think that's quite correct. That's cool that they wrote that in the book. They said it would be like saying that you'd have nothing if you purchased some food and you ate it. Well, you needed the food, so it's not precisely accurate to say you have nothing left after eating it, you survived another day. And I love that philosophy. Understanding is the same thing with renting. It's something that you have to do. So when I talk about the rent replacement strategy, you're not just talking about what I'm talking about, which is, look, you want to do this in the long run anyway. You're bringing in the fact that there's facts, there's math, and there's data behind this. What's the biggest factor you would tell to someone to show them, look, I understand where you're coming from, but here's the biggest place that you're going to make money as an owner versus a renter? Kind of a big question. I didn't prep you for it. So Brady, you're first.
I would agree that I have adult children, and it comes from a place of compassion for me. Like I'm not looking down my nose at them saying, "Hey, you should buy because renting's stupid." It's not that at all. Like, you need shelter, and I want you to save millions of dollars and have you own that rather than renting it for the rest of your life.
Legitimately millions, Brady, right?
Oh yeah, the outcome is enormous. Like it's almost hard to describe with words. You're talking millions of dollars difference in where the money goes over a long period of time.
That's incredible. Dan, what about you? Where's the biggest money for people when they're figuring out that renting can be the beginning of a change in their lives?
Well, I think you got to zoom out. Most people are focused on the cash aspect of renting versus owning, the monthly, spend, and that's very legitimate. You have to manage your cash flow. It's part of your budget, right? But I think if you zoom out far enough, you get to see what happens to your rent expenses and how relatively level your owning expenses remain. And so that's kind of the biggest, probably the Achilles heel there is to just zoom out, like look what you're spending over time, over a long period of time, rather than just this month and the next month.
One of the things that you guys did in the chapter 5, where the money goes, it was great because you have all this visualization with these charts and graphs. So Brady, when you're starting, it like you said, the first year is the worst year. It doesn't necessarily feel like it's a big win. I always tell people it doesn't feel sexy at the start. when you're writing the book, you actually got the situation to show them the long term on it. Do you have a lot of people that come to you that are thinking about the long term, or when people are talking to you about housing, are they strictly thinking where they're at right now?
I see both. You'll see some of each. Yeah. I mean, one thing that you can do simply is, I mean, we mentioned earlier in the past show, if you add up how much it's going to cost to buy that house, it's a big number. But you have to answer that on the other side of the equation, because if you're telling me that it's too expensive to own a home because it's going to cost me $1.5 million over the next 35 years to buy that $500,000 house, that might be true, but you have to give me another option because I have to have shelter. So what I would want to see is, okay, that might be true, but how much will it cost me to rent something similar over that period of time? And that number's even larger. And you don't own anything when you're done. I mean, you had shelter for 35 years, which, as we mentioned earlier, that's something, but you don't own anything. So you can spend $1.5 million over the next 35 years on owning a home, or you can spend 2.5 and not own anything when you're done. And I'm including in all those costs, the cost of repairs and taxes, insurance. That's all baked into that, of course. Yeah. So it is expensive to own a home because shelter is expensive, not because ownership's expensive. Shelter is just expensive either way you do it.
Oh, great point. That's why I say rent replacement strategy. It's not, buying a home's expensive. It's, hey, your biggest expense every month is already shelter. So let's replace it with something that does something else for you. Dan, I'm going to put you into chapter 6 because you guys talked about the cost of waiting there. And you told this awesome story about, do you want $1 million or do you want a penny that doubles every day for 29 days? As a tax person, when you are attempting to talk to somebody who is looking at diversifying and using the tax shelter of different retirement and accruing different accounts that they can reach back on someday and say, oh, that grew because it was sitting there because of Einstein's eighth wonder of the world, the compound interest. Do you happen to remember how much $1 million or a penny doubling every day was at the end of 29, 30 days?
Yeah, at the end of 30 days, it's 5.4 million. And the end of 29, it's just half that, 2.7.
Whoa. Okay. So in 29 days, it's 2.7, but then it's 5.4 because on the surface, when you're looking at it, it's $1 million right now or a penny doubling every day. The thing about this example is that people don't realize what their money can do when it's being put to work for them, as opposed to just being like that food that, yes, it gave us the nourishment, but once we pay for the sandwich, it's gone. There was another place in the book, and I can't remember where it was, but we talked about understanding the cost of waiting, because when you're looking at this $1 million versus the penny, that penny doesn't start adding up until you hit the go button. So do you remember the book where you talked about jumping on the train and jumping on the caboose?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Dan, explain that to the people out there, because I'd be talking about buying a home is best time to buy a home was yesterday, and I want to punch myself in the face when I say that and just give math to it. Explain that one, because that was the best thing I've ever heard.
So that actually came from one of Brady's contacts, a realtor over in Colorado that he knows. And cool. I thought it was just brilliant. We both did. So we're like, we got to include this in the book. So imagine that you are running after a train on foot, and your goal is to get to the first class dining car. Maybe it's the third or the fourth car in a line of 50 cars or something in the whole train. Is it easier to run on foot all the way to that first class dining car, or is it easier to get on the caboose and just walk? That's the analogy.
I get a lot of couples that will come in and, one of them will say, we're on, the beer budget and champagne tastes. And sure, it's the caboose, but if you get on the caboose, the ability to go through coach and then to the second class and then to the first class car, it's so much easier than if you're running alongside of it. And I don't think, not to mention the fact that, the next chapter in the book, you guys talked about the security of home ownership. Brady, from the financial side of things, where does the real stability, which everybody wants, understanding, like you had said, I believe it was in the last episode, that times are always uncertain. So where does that stability and safety and control come when you're owning a home?
Well, you have to have shelter. And so if you're uncertain about the future, congratulations on admitting that, because a lot of people, again, anybody who tells you, like, I love this about the news channels that will show you all the tickers and everybody talking about what's going to happen in the market. There's just this appetite because people crave certainty so badly. But the reality is nobody really knows. There's no certainty. And and if you're uncertain about the future, which you should be, wouldn't you rather own the shelter that you know you're going to need? As long as you're living, you will need shelter. So you can either own it, or you can hope that a renter will give it to you for a price that you can afford, or you'll have to move. Like, that sounds like more certainty to me, or at least more protection.
On page 88 in this chapter, in the security, you guys touched on something that people have talked to me about all the time, which is like, hey, look, I just can't do it because, what if I lose my job and I miss a payment? You brought up some points that I have been discussing with people for a long time, but I don't think people realize that when you miss a payment on a mortgage, you actually have more options than if you miss a payment to your landlord. So, Dan, what is that? Do you know anything about that? This is the worst podcast question ever. Dan, explain that.
So I actually interviewed a bankruptcy attorney about this on getting a mortgage foreclosed, because thankfully I haven't had that happen to me in my personal life. Let's knock on wood, maybe, right? But and he told me, I asked him, how long does it take for a bank to kick out a homeowner for missing a payment? He said it usually starts around 3 months, and that's a really aggressive bank that they're gonna, you stop missing your payments, they're gonna go after, they're gonna put the boot to your behind and get you out of that house. Now, a landlord, on the other hand, it might be 3 days. It really depends on your state. I know some states are more, quote, squatter friendly than not. But if you're the law abiding type that we hope you are, then yeah, you'll simply have more time as a homeowner. Banks can work with you to do what's called loan modification. To sometimes they extend that loan out to 40 years. Now, before we get too heavy into that, you cannot get a 40-year loan, an FHA 40-year loan, off the bat from a purchase. That is a result. Your credit will go in the toilet if that happens. However, it is a provision to keep you from being homeless if you're a homeowner and you've missed some payments due to some hardships.
I think in general, the piece of the puzzle that people don't understand is like, if you're concerned about buying a home because you don't think you're going to have the stability in your future, owning the home actually creates a new level of stability, and you have more options, and your bank is they will work with you, maybe even just within the confines of a single year, adjusting your loan payments. Whereas your landlord, if you miss 5 days, you already have lates. So I've seen a lot of situations where people end up paying less when they miss 2-3 months of payments to get back in the good graces with the bank. Try doing that with your landlord.
Yeah, maybe a simple way to think about that is the bank has no interest in taking your house or kicking you out. That's exactly what they don't want to have happen. They want to save that deal. The bank's asset is the loan. They want that loan to get back into good standing, so they want to fix it. The landlord's asset is the house. And if you're not making payments regularly, they want to get you out and get somebody else in that will make the payments. So you have a better alignment with who's collecting the money when you've borrowed it from the bank than when you're paying the landlord, frankly.
That's an excellent point that I have never articulated in that way. You're right.
Me neither. I just thought of
it. But it's totally true. I mean, I always talk about the late payments. Look, gang, you have such a better opportunity to negotiate with the bank because they don't want to sell it. And I tell people all the time, yeah, your landlord, I tell people that they'll negotiate with you to break the lease because they're planning on raising the rent anyway. And if they can get you out 6 months early and get $500 more a month, same goes with an eviction. They're going to do that eviction as quick as possible if you miss a payment. Whereas with your bank, and you said 3 months, and that's being generous, call it 6 to 9 months that you can hang around for that.
3 months is aggressive.
Yeah, 3 months is aggressive. You did say that. Dan, I'm going to go back to you because in the book you said Uncle Sam wants you to own a home. You guys, again, came in with the empathetic place saying that we understand the United States is not perfect, quoting you directly from the book. But Mr. Taxman, tell us what you mean by the fact that owning a home, Uncle Sam wants us to own a home.
Well, if you think about it, in the United States, it's generally easier to own real estate than in many other countries. And loan terms, for example, the 30-year fixed loan, I'm not aware of any other countries that have that available, a 30-year fixed term on a
Oh
mortgage.
no, I talk to people who have a podcast like mine. These two great ladies, they're your real estate mums. They call themselves. They're awesome, and they're like, they always have me on, and they're always like, "Damn Yanks," because theirs is all variable, changes all the time.
So in the U.S., it is easier for people to own their own property. The banks will lend you money because that's a very safe asset. I'm not saying you can't get a loan for a mortgage in other countries, but they make it a little harder generally to be a homeowner. And so there's all kinds of laws that help people do just that. The creation of Fannie and Freddie, the FHA, the VA, all these loan programs were made to facilitate home ownership in this country because somebody who was really smart decided that, man, one of the big boons, one of the bastions of the middle class is property ownership, especially owning where they live. And so smart people have recognized that and facilitated that in the United States.
And I think people aren't talking about that right now because the headlines, it is such people get caught in the perception of the moment. And, it's kind of like if you're a sports fan like I am, and, after the game, this guy's the greatest player ever, and this team is the worst team ever. And, you're just so in the immediacy of what's happening. I don't think people understand, in general, even though it's unaffordable to buy a home, if you're just looking at the rent payment versus the mortgage payment, there are still massive benefits to home ownership within your taxes. And even with the tax change that's coming, I mean, we still got the mortgage interest deduction. That's a big piece. Now, you had talked about with people owning investment property. Dan, can you go into some of the things how investment properties, there's tax benefits to that. So if people want to buy their first home and then buy another one.
Yeah, it's a great idea, especially, when you own your first home to keep it as a rental property. Now, you want to run some numbers around that too, but one of the things I'll ask the people coming to me, first-time home buyers, is, hey, do you like the idea of keeping your house as an investment property after you move? If so, let's run that analysis now. While you're buying it. So 5, 6, 7 years later, whenever you want to move into your next house, whenever you want to upgrade, you have a pretty solid understanding of what this could potentially do, how it could do as an investment property. And I'm not just talking about cash flow, which is important for investment properties, obviously, but the holistic rate of return on a property, the appreciation, the cash flows in there, of course, the tax benefits, and the debt service, the renters paying that principal portion of your mortgage for me. How do you bake all that together? And how does that look as far as an investment vehicle for you? So as you leverage your first house, you can use that as a springboard into your next one.
And I think, I've had this discussion with different homies when I interview them, some of the folks after they purchase a home, because through the podcast, I've realized you just did this. It's in your brain. Let's try it again. Now, maybe instead of putting $2,500 a month, you're putting $25 a month because you now have a new home. But start the process again. And hopefully by then we'll have solved the problem that you guys brought up in Chapter 8, which I have been saying so much so that I'm like a morning radio DJ, which is hysterical because lots of my listeners don't even know what that is. But I'm a dork, and we have a drop, and then we have a sound effect where we go low inventory when we talk about the one thing that's going to affect prices. Now, Brady, I'm going to ask you to talk about inventory, but first I have to know who decided to put in this quote. If you were waiting for the opportune moment, that was it. And it was said by Captain Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean. Who's the dork? That's Dan's the dork. Okay, I love it. I knew you and I got along for a reason, Dan.
I found all the quotes actually at the beginning. That was the fun part of writing the book.
Yes, there are plenty of them. I noticed, Kevin McAllister from Home Alone. So Brady, talk to us about inventory and how that affects the larger financial picture of people wanting to buy a home. Because right now, they all say to me, Sidoni, inventory sucks.
Yeah, and I remember, gosh, before I joined the real estate space, inventory was a strange idea to me. And basically what that means is how many houses are available to be bought. So if there's more buyers than there are sellers, that's low inventory. That means the sellers have an advantage. And so I'm only repeating that because I remember, gosh, 7 or 8 years ago, I wasn't sure what that meant in the real estate space. So just in case there was anybody that wasn't clear about that. Sometimes we talk in our vernacular in our business and we think that people know what we're talking about. That's not always true. But essentially, inventory it has a big impact on prices, but we're in a place now where inventory, I'm not a big fan of like micro timing the markets. But macro trends you can look at, and when a lot of people recite because they either went through it or they saw their parents go through it, what happened in 2008. And at that point we had unreal inventory because people were speculating in real estate and just building as fast as they could because they were watching the prices go up like crazy. And so a lot of people they correlate that when values of real estate go up really quickly, they think, oh, that's like 2008. That's what's going to happen. And it's not anything like that. There isn't enough inventory. There aren't enough homes right now for the people that want to buy them. That's what's causing the pricing to go up, not speculation. So, and you can measure inventory based on how many people are buying versus selling. So it's not the same kind of problem that it was before. Now, am I going to tell you that if you buy a house, there's no way that it can go down in value? That's absolutely incorrect. And people who try to time it, they're waiting for something to go down. And that can be a challenge too, because you're spending, if rent is $3,000 a month, that's $36,000 a year. So you're spending $36,000 a year to hope that real estate goes down when it almost never does. It's, again, renting is a good short-term strategy to provide shelter in a temporary time. But
yeah,
I don't believe in trying to time the value or the price of real estate or rates, by the way. I don't believe in trying to time that in order to get out from under rent.
You're exactly right, because that's when I'm talking to people about low inventory now. When I talk about low inventory, I'm talking about the stats that low inventory began in 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12, the only 5 years where we haven't built at least 1 million homes, new homes, because all the builders went bankrupt. And what was happening ahead of time, what you said was so great, Brady, speculation. Where we're at right now, it's pure supply and demand. You guys wrote in the book, from 1982 to 2024, the average number of homes available for sale was around 2.2 million. That was when we had a population of 288 million people, or one home per 131 people. In October of 2024, there were 1.4 homes available. That's high for today, which was one home for 241 people because our population has increased. And so as we continue to move forward right now, understanding where inventory is will affect the affordability, and also in a way, and I'm with you, I'm never going to say that homes aren't going to go down, but in a way, it will at least give you some peace of mind that a crash isn't going to happen because there's tons of speculation out there. Speculation means people buying homes thinking it's going to double in a couple of years. That's what happened in 2005 and 6 and 7. That is not happening right now. You guys moved into Chapter 9 affordability. We've talked about this a couple times. My favorite thing in this one, who had the Knight Rider big wheel when they were young?
That was me.
Brady. Okay, I'm going to tell you the story, and then I'm going to let Brady explain it from the financial side. Okay, so Brady said when he was younger, he had a Knight Rider big wheel, which will tell you how old Brady is if you don't know who Knight Rider is. It's the guy from Baywatch. Oh, wait, no one even knows who Baywatch is anymore. Not the guy from High School Musical, Baywatch and The Rock, the other one. Anyway, Knight Rider was awesome. I had a green machine. It was better, but that's another story. Anyway, he loved his Knight Rider big wheel. And then one Christmas morning, he woke up and there was a Huffy bike sitting underneath his tree. And he was disappointed because he didn't know how to ride a bike yet. And in the book, you said, my parents gave me a chore for Christmas. So explain how getting off your Knight Rider big wheel and figuring out how to ride a Huffy bike so that you could go further, faster, and explore more is how a first-time home buyer can learn to look at affordability.
Yeah, so it's kind of like just the next level. I've also heard it explained like a plateau. You don't see what's up there until you're there. You just see the climb, right? It's a similar idea. Like the bike was a chore to me because I didn't yet know how to ride a bike. And I was like, oh, I don't get to play on Christmas. I have to learn how to ride a bike in order to play with that toy. So I didn't have a playful Christmas morning. I was kind of let down. I remember that. It was one of my first memories, actually. I don't have a lot of memories about that time in my life because I was only 4 or 5 or something. And it just felt like a chore. But of course, we all know, like, a bike can go way faster. It can go over way more terrain. You can go so much farther. And by the way, all my friends were going to be riding bikes anyway, if they weren't already. And I wanted to, I had, my social life depended on me being able to go around with them. But at first, it seemed like an obstacle. And there's just this underlying human truth that responsibility and opportunity are two sides of the same coin, right?
Wow.
The ability to
Adulting.
ride a bike is obviously a great thing, but it's an effort to get there. And you don't get to appreciate that until you're there and you can understand that. And homeownership is the same way.
And that plateau analogy or metaphor was great. I've never heard that one before. All you see is the climb. And right now, the climb is so big in so many people's faces. And because that cost for shelter seems similar, a lot of people just ignore the climb. And what I love about the book is that if you read the book, it gives you all the insight of what you will see on the top of that plateau. And all the financial stability, the control you're going to have in your life. At one point in the same chapter here, you talk a lot about how affordability and timing the market. It might feel like you're getting a deal, like you're buying a mattress on President's Day weekend. But in reality, as long as your rent keeps going up and inflation keeps going up, you write, well, nobody wants to pay more for something than they feel it's worth. The difficult truth is, unless you have a time machine, it's unlikely that a lower monthly cost of home ownership can be gained by waiting to buy, as tempting as that idea might be. But for that to happen, you're going to be waiting for interest rates to drop, prices to fall, or both. So, since I'm pretty sure, Dan, you put the Doc Brown time machine quote in at the beginning of one of these chapters, do you want to expand on that thing, which I tell people all the time, is if you're timing, you have to wait for both to happen, and that doesn't happen?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the books and got the charts in there that kind of explain that really nicely. But the idea is the only way, something I ask, yeah, let me just step back. Something I ask people all the time when they're saying, hey, I'm waiting for interest rates to go down. I ask them, are you waiting for interest rates to go down or for your monthly payment to go down? To which they
Yeah.
inevitably say, yeah, the monthly payment. I said, well, there's really only one way to do that in a low supply market, which we discussed already about inventory. In a low supply market, when rates go down, prices go up because there's a lot of people. The demand hasn't changed that much. There's so many people waiting in the wings to buy, David, right now. And so if rates hit 5% or even 5.5% tomorrow, there would be a flood. And what happens when there's a flood of people to buy something? What happens to the price of that something? It shoots up. And so rates go down, prices go up, your payment remains level or keeps creeping up over time, which is what the reality says happens over time. And the only way to really have a lower payment is to already own the asset when rates go down, if they go down, right? So if that happens, you can get a lower payment only if you refinance and already own it, because if you wait, the price of that sucker has probably gone up significantly to outweigh the benefits of the lower interest rate.
Yeah, and you guys had mentioned, what happens if interest rates go up? And I think you wrote in the book, you sit back and you go, woohoo! And you're just excited about it. So, Brady, if people are looking at interest rates right now, which people absolutely are, my inbox will tell you that. We have already talked about the fact that we don't necessarily agree with, you marry the house and you date the rate. Find the affordability, but if there is always the option that I guess expand on the fact that people are just too fearful of it and thinking that for some reason financially waiting for a lower rate is going to save them more money when we're in granted a declining appreciation market, but still an appreciating market.
Well, what the crux of all of that is that the supply and demand curve in real estate is a little different than the supply and demand curve of oranges at the supermarket. Right? Because people don't borrow money to buy oranges at the supermarket. But people buy real estate based on the cost of the monthly payment, not the price of the real estate itself. So if rates drop, Yes, you'll have a lower rate on your statement and you'll get to brag to your friends at the gym about how low your rate is. That's a thing. I don't know why. And I'm not
Dude.
looking down my nose because I like it too. I like talking about my rate. It's just a human thing. But if you have a lower rate, but you have to borrow more money so that your payment is the same, because that's what would happen. And if rates drop, the prices rise to offset that, and then your payment is the same, but it's the same rate. You just have borrowed more money. But if you have to borrow more money and your payment is the same, that's not a better position to be in, by the way. Like if all things equal, if I have to make a 30-year payment of $3,000 a month, would I rather borrow less money at a higher rate or more money at a lower rate because I waited for the lower rate? I would rather have borrowed less money for two reasons. A, if I ever get a windfall and if I want to pay that off faster, I have a lower balance to pay down. So if I'm going to make 360, that's 30 years, right? 360 payments of $3,000 a month. It doesn't matter what the rate and the price are if it's the same 30 years. But the other advantage of having the higher rate and not waiting for rates to drop is if rates do drop, which we don't know will happen, but if they do, then you can refinance without borrowing more money because you already own the home. You don't have to buy it at higher rates after they appreciate. So in all scenarios, like long term, again, short term, anything can happen, but long term, like I don't like most bumper sticker slogans about money because they're not nuanced enough. But there's one that I really like, which is it's not timing the market, it's time in the market. You have to get started. You have to stop giving your landlord $30,000 a year. That's a big financial decision.
You got to get on the caboose, or you're going to be running after that train. And it's harder and harder to get to first class when you're on the side of the road running. Okay. Brady, I could keep going on that for a long time, but I'm going to jump to chapter 10.
Your show. Go ahead if you want to.
Well, what you talked about was really interesting to me, Brady, with just the higher interest rate for the lower amount, how that still offers you all the same benefits of the lower interest rate, but the higher loan amount later on down the line, because you're talking about you're going to get equity faster. Yeah, your monthly payment might be a little bit more, but I don't think that's something that people think about. I don't think they think about the fact that if rates go up, who cares? It doesn't matter. So, and that's where, I guess that's to me where what you talked about being hamstrung as a financial advisor, not being able to sit down with a real estate agent and the lender and go over all of those things. Where do you take a first-time home buyer who wants to explore all the avenues on how to make that monthly payment more affordable for them as a financial advisor with no restrictions, because we're talking hypothetically here?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you going to tell them to go to figure out? Because if they just can't afford it at 7%, what are you going to what are you going to tell me over this conversation that no one's listening to?
Well, there's a term I really like that I learned from another financial advisor, and he talks about going through your finances. He calls it refinancing your finances. Go look at your insurance policies, look at your taxes. If you're getting a big refund, update your W-4 so that you get more money in your paycheck, especially when you reconsider that you might have more deductions as a homeowner. You can restructure that. Dan knows more about that than I do, but you can restructure that so that you get more money in your paycheck to make that monthly payment. There's also ways that you can, I don't know if you want to go down this path right now, but ways you can come up with money for down payments that aren't obvious to everybody. There's also programs like down payment assistance programs. Those are usually state run, so every state has a different one, so we can't go down all of them, but there are lots of them all over the place. It's almost like, Dan mentioned this earlier, it's almost like they want you to own a home, and it's not almost like, that is the exact truth, right? We've built a country and a culture where we want our citizens, and remember, when I talk about the government, I don't say we, or I don't say they, I say we, because we're a self-governing nation. Home ownership is hugely stabilizing for the middle class, and we recognize that, and so we try to make it as affordable, as doable as possible. But if you think that you're going to make shelter more affordable by renting, like you mentioned a minute ago, David, when rates go up, you're going to be glad if you already own, because it's like, wow, I've got a 7% rate, and now my friends are borrowing at 8 or 9%. That feels pretty good. Well, guess what else you avoided when rates go up? Massive rent increases. Those are very, very highly correlated statistics. When rates go up, rents go up. And when rents go up, rates go up. So if rates go up, not only did you get a better rate, you're also like, wow, my friends who still are not buying, they're still renting, their rents went up by 8% instead of the normal 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Because that increase in rates and higher than average rent increases are very, very tightly correlated.
Interest rates are so tied to inflation, right? And
Yeah.
that was the big talk of 2022. Why did rates go up? Well, inflation was out of control. Well, interest rates are going up. What is the biggest part of inflation? It's rent. It's shelter, is it not? So
Yeah.
mortgage rates go up, inflation goes up, your rent goes up along with it.
Yeah. And, it's so interesting because I've been trying to talk to people about that so much right now. Like, that's why 2025, if you're like, David, I'm trying to time the market, good luck. Because me, Dan, and Brady, we don't know squat right now. Nobody does. Stock market's going up and T-bills are going up too. Huh? Like, nothing makes any sense right now. And so it's very difficult. But so we jumped ahead kind of a little bit because I asked you about interest rates, but it's great, Brady. Refinance your finances. In chapter 12, you guys talk about scraping the down payment. But I think that's what's cool there is we're talking about both things. When you're figuring out how to scrape up a down payment, you can also refinance your finances and look at your other monthly payments so that new monthly payment, originally it can be a savings account, but then once you purchase the home, it'll just be you've lowered your monthly expenses before you got into that new expense. So you talked about down payment assistance. I'll let you both talk about this. Brady, I'll start with you. The 401k, the Roth IRA, as a financial advisor, speak to the fact of what I always like to talk about, that people don't want to touch that because they think it's not safe. And I'm telling them that your home is probably going to be your largest retirement unless you end up going crazy the rest of your life. And it's just diversification of your portfolio.
Well, this is predicated on you have to kind of see it in the book because it's long to talk about. But the choice to own a home versus renting something similar over the next 35 years is a 7-figure financial decision. It's enormous.
Wow.
So where I'm going with that is if people say, here's a big one that people talk about, a lot of the financial onliners, and you mentioned one of them earlier, David,
Yep.
and the one that I like to quote, it starts with a D and it ends with Ave Ramsey.
Uh-huh.
But they'll talk about, well, one of the first things you want to do is get your employer match.
Yeah.
Because that's like 100% return on your money. And that's kind of true, but an employer match is usually only 3 to 5% of your income anyway. So if you're making, $80,000 a year, your match is at most $4,000. If it's a 5% match, right? You put in 4, they'll put in 4. That's 100% return, but it's only on $4,000. So 100% return is good, but on $4,000, it's okay. And by the way, do that. You should get your employer match. But if you're also giving $3,000 a month away to the landlord, that's probably not your highest priority. Like, focus on that decision first because it's so foundational to your later on financial success to own the roof over your head that all those other things, while they're important, they're not as important. So when you're talking about your 401k or your Roth IRA, those should be secondary to home ownership. Again, there's some caveats. As long as you're not planning on leaving town in the next 6 months to join the Peace Corps, right? You want to be there for 4 or 5 years or so before homeownership really starts to sing. But those things should be secondary. So when it comes to 401k, you can borrow against that, which is a fantastic financial tool. IRAs, Roth IRAs can be kind of tough because if you take the money out, it's taxable. And if you're not yet 59 and a half, there's a 10% penalty, but they waive that for first-time home buyers. If you're using it to buy a home, that's one of the ways in which we talked about where we really do want people owning a home, and we waive things that are normal costs or financial penalties for taking access or getting access to your IRA. So there are exceptions to that, but either way, those things should come in. Those are a lower priority than home ownership when you're talking about financial stability. Because it's going to be your biggest expense over your life. You may as well minimize it and own something for all that money you're going to spend.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I have a lot of people come to me and say, well, I can't afford to buy a home because we want to make sure we have all these other things to prepare for our future. And maybe there's a $2,000 contribution above and beyond a match into a 401k. And I'm like, well, you're paying $4,000 a month in rent. So you can drop that, $4,800 this year or $48,000 this year. and you're only, giving yourself $24,000 into your 401k for that $2,000 a month, and you could be diversifying and having two large retirement assets both growing at the same time.
Well, and think of it like also if you're going to be paying more for home ownership for the first, I don't know, let's call it 6-7 years before rent exceeds that. That's 6 or 7 years out of the next 50 where it costs more to own a home than to rent one on a monthly basis, depending on how much you put down. Like there's some variables to play with there.
Yeah.
But you're talking about the next, 50 years minus 7 where you actually spend less on your shelter. Think about putting all that money in your 401k. Do the math on that, and it's enormous.
Yeah. And it's incredible. And like I've said to you guys, the Mullen boys here have so many charts and graphs in here that really break all this down. It's not just train analogies and Johnny Depp quotes. Dan, the people that are trying to figure out what they're going to be doing with that retirement stuff, Brady touched on a little bit. Do you find that most 401ks, the tax event for borrowing against it as a primary homeowner is, as I've said before, is it for most of the time it's not a problem? You don't actually get taxed on it if you're using it to buy your first home?
Well, for an IRA, you can take a $10,000 distribution out that doesn't incur that 10% penalty. If it's a Roth IRA, there aren't tax consequences for pulling that out. 59 and a half, that does matter. We prefer to borrow that, do a borrowing from your 401k because you do avoid that 10% penalty. You also avoid the taxes if you do that because it's not a distribution. And one thing I wanted to mention too that's pretty magical is borrowing from your 401k does not affect your debt to income ratio, your DTI.
Wow.
Kinda nice.
Well, okay. Let's get into that a little bit. Because the manipulation of when we're trying to talk to people about debt to income ratio, and I have a lot of self-employed people that will come to me and they talk to Rocket Mortgage and they find out, well, okay, I have to redo my taxes completely for the next 2 years, show more income. And so where do you come when people come to you and say, I want to buy a house? Do you look to attempt to give them a structure for the future? And do you ever go back and restructure some of the returns of the past?
So if you're talking about somebody self-employed, right? Is that where you're going? So self-employed, I have an entire system I do. It's called a self-employed mortgage readiness review, where there's probably a dozen different aspects I look at from, okay, how are you structuring your vehicle expenses? How is that loan recorded on the tax return? Are you taking advantage of Section 179 for some of the things that you buy? There's a whole thing. And that's really fun for me, actually, because helping people save money and get a lower interest rate on a mortgage is, man, that's fantastic. One thing I hesitate to do often is amend a return. That gets really shady really fast. There's some people like, yeah, I want to amend my return so I look better to the mortgage company. And then after I close my loan, I'm going to amend it again. That's a 5-letter word. I was going to say 4-letter, but it might as well be. It's fraud,
Yeah. So if someone comes to you and you look at last year's taxes and they're writing everything off because they're starting a new business or they're a self-employed person, what are you doing to help people figure out how to look better for their DTI going into the next year?
So, yeah, I look at last year's tax returns and I kind of break it down. What categories are they? Are there any expenses in there that are actually personal expenses? You're not supposed to do that, right? And I even have a spreadsheet, surprise, that kind of details, okay, if you have to pay more taxes, if that's the result that has to happen for whatever reason, it doesn't always end up that way. There's some tricks I can pull, that don't end up like that. But if you had to pay a little more in taxes, what is the result of that versus the lower interest rate you'll get by qualifying for a conventional loan versus one of those non-QM loans, which are bank statement loans? Those are fine, but the interest rate and the terms are usually significantly worse than you can get on a conventional loan. So yes, I'll look at last year's tax return. I'll do some coaching on, okay, what does next year's tax return have to look like based on what market conditions are today, because we don't know what they are going to be tomorrow.
Yeah.
Let's change maybe how you record certain expenses and certain debts. And if there is an amendment warranted, like maybe you for example, you recorded your vehicle expenses one way and you wanted to take mileage instead. Like maybe we can do an amendment for a legitimate tax reason. But if we're doing an amendment solely to qualify for a mortgage, that gets in rough waters there. That there might be some three-letter agencies that don't like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a whole thing. We do an entire review. We look at last year's, we look at this year's and projected, and do some planning. A little planning goes a long way.
But again, I think the thing that's great about this is whether we're talking from the financial side with Brady or the tax side with Dan, you're as much as you can to still stay in compliance. You're approaching these conversations with your clients with real estate as something that you guys are passionate about, helping them build their wealth. And I believe that combination of discussion, instead of every independent individual that the home buyer is talking to, trying to just do that one thing best, when you're looking at all these pieces together, your taxes, your finances, and when then obviously you're going to bring in the mortgage broker at some point. I think when everyone's working together, there's a better outcome for the first-time home buyer, because especially now in this difficult time, you have to get creative when we're trying to help people find things that are affordable. Now, Chapter 13 is the overcoming obstacles, and you guys quoted Patrick Verona from 10 Things I Hate About You, the great Heath Ledger, rest in peace. Don't let anyone ever make you feel like you don't deserve what you want. You talk a little bit about working on your credit scores, which we talk about all the time here. You talked a little bit about even bankruptcies and overcoming that. But one of the things that you guys talked about was, but my lease won't be up until, which was a header on one of your things. Talk to me about the conversations you've had with people who say, well, I'm going to start right now, but I don't want to buy a home till February next year because of my lease. Brady, how would you have that conversation with someone?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, every situation is different. And the first thing that I would start with is, well, talk to your landlord. There's a lot of landlords that are open to negotiating with you because they know that they can charge $500 a month more for that property if you've been there a while, and the rates have been, or the market has allowed that for them. So a lot of times they're pretty flexible, but not always. You can even get concessions from the seller to help offset that. There's lots of ways you can do it. And at the end of the day, if you actually just run the numbers with somebody competent to run the numbers, it often isn't that big of a deal. So if it costs you $2,000 to break a lease rather than pay that landlord $2,000 a month for the next 9 months, it's like, okay, well, it's one of those 9 has gone out the window. Like, it's not fun if you end up having to pay it. And there might be certain circumstances where it's only 1 month away, and in which case, don't break the lease. That wouldn't make sense, or something like that. But just run the numbers and see what it really costs. But it's not that it's not an insurmountable problem in most cases.
Yeah. And it truly just comes down to the fact that if you can have a conversation with someone to help you run the numbers above and beyond just the surface numbers, and hopefully they've read your book and they're already ahead of time listening to a bunch of my podcasts, and they're realizing, especially right now, it's a slow, fearful time in real estate right now, but home prices are still going up. So if home prices are still going up, you're not only losing $2,000 a month, but you're also going to be paying more for the home.
You know what I think is part of that too, David, is people just don't like something that's called a penalty.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh.
Like, if you really do the math, it's not that big of a deal. What's that movie about Jordan and when he got his contract and Nike? What was that movie called? Like Air Jordan or Air, something like that?
The Matt Damon one, which is the story of Sonny Vaccaro.
Do you
I know
remember
the guy's name that Matt Damon played, but I don't know the name of the movie.
Well, do you remember the part of the movie where they were showing the shoe and they're like, the NBA won't allow that. There's not enough white. That's going to be a fine of $4,000 per game or whatever. And Nike was like, we'll pay it. That's good advertising.
Yes.
Like, that's just smart thinking. Like, do the numbers. That's it. We're going to stand, like, it's an interesting part of the movie, but they're like, call it a penalty, call it marketing. We don't care. We're going to get attention with that. It's just dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you break a lease and there's a quote unquote penalty and it's called a penalty and everybody's like, well, I'm a law abiding citizen, I don't pay penalties. It's like, yeah, but if it's going to save you $10,000 to pay 2, who cares what it's called? It's not a legal penalty. It's just
not
a
a legal
contract.
penalty. And let me just break it down math style, since I'm with my math boys. That's an $8,000 bonus instead of a $2,000 penalty.
Oh, you did that in your head, David? Wow.
Look, guys, I've been around you for a couple hours now, so it's starting to rub off.
Rubbing off on you?
Okay. Well, I obviously shouldn't be doing math. Dan, I'm gonna wrap up this session with on this tax benefits of home ownership. When you buy a home and you're a new homeowner, what do you have to look forward to when you're writing off stuff in your first year owning a home?
Possibly Form 1098.
What
if you want the nerd
that?
term. The nerd term is the mortgage interest deduction. And so people get really excited about this. And I will add a caveat there that not everybody can take advantage of that. It depends on how much mortgage interest you pay during the year. It also depends on whether you're single or married or head of household, like a divorcee with kids living with you. But it's a very real thing. If you're single, and you pay more than $15,000 of interest, you have a net benefit by having some of that interest as a deduction on your taxes, depending on how much you pay, of course, and the rest of the picture. But certain, especially single people and head of household, they're in that range to where they're going to pay a bunch of interest. You're going to get a tax benefit for it.
And I heard, like, in 2021 and 2022, standard deduction, a lot of people started not talking about it. But now it's getting back in the news now that the average price is like $420-something thousand. But in general, are you talking to people about the process of moving and parts of that being deductible as well? The loans and the fees and the moving costs and boxes and all that stuff?
So the moving costs aren't deductible anymore as of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. So effective in 2018, the moving expenses aren't anymore. Sometimes for some military members, that's a thing.
Okay.
They're often reimbursed by the military branch they're using for it. But points and interest, yeah, absolutely, go for it. It's becoming more feasible with the higher prices and higher rates. Yeah, that's becoming more of a conversation topic for sure.
And with the remote living right now, are you finding that people going from an apartment into a home are consulting with you on the home office deductions as part of their new living space?
Yeah, sometimes if they're self-employed, I always bring that up. It's in my interview forum or when I am doing a face-to-face one. One of the questions I ask, by the way, is in the next 2 years, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the likelihood of you doing something with real estate or something to that effect? Not a yes or a no. It's a scale of 1 to 10 because that will affect how I prepare your tax return if you are self-employed in order to facilitate homeownership for you, if that's something that's in the cards for you.
Well, from your lips to every other accountant's ears, because I wish more people would do that. The hardest part of us doing our jobs is people calling us, doing everything on their own, especially in this Google AI world. And then they call us, and I'm trying to tell people, if you had spoken to a tax advisor, a financial advisor, a mortgage broker, a real estate person a year and a half ago, you could have set yourself up for so many more successes. So the sooner that you reach out, the sooner you get to preparing, the better. I am going to bring you guys back. I will let everyone know right now, the book is called Real Decisions. I'm going to talk to you in a little bit at the end of the interview here about some fun stuff I want to do with this book, because I read this book and I freaked out. I really did feel like you're orphan. I'm going to do a DNA check to make sure I'm not a Mullen and my parents didn't find me at a fire station. Guys, I cannot thank you enough. This is jam-packed information. Thank you guys so much. And we're going to come back and talk about your best ideas for what people could do in the future when we figure out what the hell is going on with stock market and tariffs. So you get prepared, because I'm going to ask you to answer that question for us.
Sounds good.
You got it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, David.
Yep.
Well, as a host, I am humbled and so thankful to Dan and Brady Mullen for sharing their insights. I mean, these are two guys who had careers in finance and felt very much the way I did, that someone just needed to lay this out so that first-time homebuyers could see not only just the theoretical benefits, but the actual factual mathematical benefits of home ownership. Understanding that in today's high-rent society and economic environment, that when you're looking at understanding you're already paying for shelter, there is a better way to do it that not only benefits you in the now, but is going to benefit you in the long run. Huge thanks to Dan and Brady. If you're getting stuff out of this, please give me a rate, give me a review, write a little blurb on Apple or Spotify podcasts. You can always check us out on all the social media, How to Buy a Home or How to Buy a Home podcast, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. It's everywhere. And anytime you've got any questions, at howtobuyahome.com, there's a button. Just ask David. Of course, you can always ask me for a unicorn, and you can get your rent replacement strategy started immediately. And remember, gang, you can do this.
Looking for more DIY education or your own personal step-by-step guidance through the home buying journey? Since 2019, How to Buy a Home has been the #1 resource for first-time home buyers. So visit howtobuyahome.com to get started.